Welcome back to Reading Sisters. Today we are going to continue reading Song for a Whale from part 4, so let's get started. He hadn't always swum alone. Long ago, when the loudest sounds in the ocean were the songs of whales, he had a pod. Those first whales had tried to talk to him. Every day they worked to change their songs to something like his. He returned their calls, but his sounds meant nothing to them. He heard the other whales, but nothing he sang back made sense. They thought he didn't understand. They communicated to one another, past him, through him, across him, like he was a coral reef or a kelp forest they passed by. But he heard all of it. He understood them when they despaired, giving up on ever hearing him, and when they lamented he would never be able to contribute to the pod. He couldn't warn them off a coming predator or announce a scent of waters that were good for feeding. Yes, I can, he bellowed. There, waves full of krill. He turned to show them the way. He sang his message, struggling to match the sounds of the whales around him. But the sea grabbed his song and dragged it away, too high for the others to reach. One night, when he awoke to float to the surface for a breath, he found himself alone. After so much time, so many songs unheard, his family had left him. He called out, "Where are you? And what will I do now?" Knowing no answer would come, knowing the sounds held meaning only for himself. Chapter 5. At lunch. I sat at a table with other people, but still alone. I could actually read lips all right. Not that I'd ever tell Mrs. Conn. No matter how good I was, there'd be no way to catch everything. Too many sounds like the same, and in a group of people it's impossible to pick up more than a word or two here and there. It's even worse if they're eating. Some kids try to remember to look at me when they talked. Then they get into a conversation with everyone else too fast for me to keep up. A couple of kids knew the sign language alphabet and would spell out sentences letter by letter. That took forever, so I tell them just to go ahead and write it. Whenever I spelled something back, they didn't catch it anyway, unless I slowed down so much that by the time I got to the end of the sentence, they'd forgotten the beginning. Some people at my table were in the science class. I was still looking about the whale called Blue 55, and wondered if they were too. It didn't look like anyone was talking about him. I wanted to ask if they thought he liked swimming around by himself, or if he wanted friends. Maybe he'd try singing like the other whales and couldn't do it, or he was happy singing his own song. Nina walked by with some of her friends and waved like she wanted to tell me something super important. Even when I understood her, she never said anything important. But she had seen the Blue 55 video, and obviously she was interested in sign language. I took a deep breath and decided to give it a try. As clearly as possible, I signed to her, "What do you think of that whale?" Nina pointed at my lunch and signed something that made absolutely no sense. I couldn't figure it out what she was trying to get at. Maybe the message was jumbled because she was excited and singing too fast, as if her hands couldn't keep up with her brain. I held up a hand to slow her down. Numbers and letters were easy enough to understand, so I shook a letter B to sign, blue, then tapped the air twice with a 55 hand shape. Blue 55, I shrugged a little and raised my eyebrows with a question. It should have been perfectly clear. I was asking, "So what did you think of that whale?" Somehow she still didn't get it, and I didn't understand whatever she was trying to say. Nothing that looked like whale or ocean or song. I gave up and turned to Sanjay, who was sitting across from me and talking about a new level he'd unlocked in a video game or something like that. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nina signing even more furiously. Her friends backed out to avoid getting smacked in the face by her flaying arms. Though she was the one making a scene, I was getting the attention. Sanjay pointed to tell me I should be looking at Nina. but I waved him off, as if I were dying to know the rest of his video story game. I took a quick glance to see if Nina had given up yet. My face burned as she moved in closer. Great, this girl couldn't recognize a hint if it ran up and set hands on fire. I reached into my backpack and ripped a piece of paper from a notebook. What's everyone doing this weekend? Was the first thing I thought to start a conversation. Nina was right next to me. I knew this not from looking at her, but from the breeze created by her hand waving at the side of my head. Finally, I turned to look because everyone was pointing by then. What I had witnessed was amazing. Not even one sign made sense. I said to Nina, I don't understand you. Then turned back to the group. Still, she didn't give up. She leaned over, forcing me to see her, and signed with her hands right in my face. I couldn't take it anymore. My face burned hotter. Everyone looked at me like I was the dumb one for not understanding. I pushed her away and said, leave me alone. I didn't mean to push her so hard, but she ended up crashing into the people at the next table and landing on the floor. Nina's mouth was open wide, as if she were yelling. She must have been making a lot of noise since people from all across the cafeteria stood up to get a better view. The lunch teachers made their way to the table. Then her face was full of concern. One of their mouths formed the words, what happened? A teacher helped Nina up. She rubbed her elbow where she'd landed, but seemed fine. Otherwise, I stood up and swung my backpack over my shoulder. Even though the bell hadn't rung, I headed to the principal's office. That was where they were going to send me anyway. The secretary was picking up the phone when she saw me coming, and I waved to her on my way to the Principal Shelton's office. Mrs. Shelton wasn't there, so I went ahead and rearranged the furniture. I slid the back of the chair over to one side of the desk. Mr. Charles would sit there, so I could see both him and Mrs. Shelton at the same time. I sank into my favorite chair and stared at the ceiling while I waited. Miss Shelton came in and sat behind her desk, then held out her arms as if she were saying, well. I shrugged. No point in chatting until Mr. Charles got there. I reached up to my pendant I wore around my neck, the one made from the old Zenith radio knob. They used to emboss the wooden knobs with a raised Z-shaped lightning bolt in my room home. I had a collection of antique radios. I did some repair for work. Mr. Gunnar Antique Shop, and then I'd made the pendants, so I'd have a piece of my collection with me even when I was away from home. While we waited, I traced the jagged edges of the letter with my fingertip. Mr. Charles came in a few minutes later. Welcome, I signed, as he took the seat across from me. I pointed to a picture on Mr. Sheldon's desk that I hadn't seen before. New grandbaby? Yes, that's Henry, she said after Mr. Charles interpreted my question. Now tell me, what happened in the cafeteria? Miss Sheldon Mrs. Sheldon knew what happened. I was sure of that. She always wanted to get my side of the story. One of those things they teach in the principal's school. Find out what happened. They question the kid to see if they lie about it. Mr. Charles interpreted between Mrs. Shelton and me as I filled her in. Nina was only trying to ask what you were having for lunch, she asked. I actually slapped myself in the forehead. All this because Nina wanted to know what kind of sandwich I had. She was trying to make conversation with you, Iris, to be friendly. No, she's not, I signed. She's trying to show off and pretend she knows something she doesn't. She needs to keep her hands out of my face. Mrs. Sheldon reminded me of the school's zero tolerance policy for fighting. I tried to argue that I was only removing someone's hands from my personal space, but it was no use. At school, that counted as fighting. This isn't fair. I slumped back in the chair and looked out the window at the parking lot. Mr. Charles waved to get my attention and interpreted the rest of what Mrs. Shelton said. The other students at the lunch table did say that you tried to get Nina to stop when she got too close to you. We'll talk to her about respecting personal space. If it happens again, tell a teacher instead of shoving someone. Okay, I left it at that. Mrs. Sheldon probably wouldn't like it if I pointed out that shoving was a lot quicker than flagging down a teacher and scribbling a note to explain what was going on. I'd have in school suspension for the next 2 days, starting right then. That I meant sit in one room all day and my teachers would send me work there. Fine with me. Regular suspension would have been even better. At home, I could fly through my schoolwork and then start on some radio repairs. That would probably why they didn't do it, because they figured out it was too much like a vacation. Then Mrs. Sheldon slipped in the worst part. and you'll have to apologize to Nina when she returns to class. Maybe she'd forget about that. By the end of the school day, I had a text from Mom. Get straight home after school. Of course, Mrs. Sheldon had called to let her know of my sentence. I biked toward home after school, but I wasn't in a big hurry to get there. My parents had told me I'd been in serious trouble if I got sent to the principal's office again. Even though there was a whole month left of school, I wasn't sure what they meant by serious trouble. But some things were better left a mystery. That morning I had been working on a radio repair from Mr. Gunnar, a mint-colored Zenith from the 1950s. That was why I was a little late getting to school. I was so close to fixing it, but then I realized I didn't have what I needed to finish the job. Mr. Gunnar wasn't in a hurry. He always told me to take my time when I needed to do the job right, but I couldn't stand to leave anything sitting around broken. It chased me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The junkyard was on the way home, sort of. At the gate of Moe's Junk Emporium, I hopped on my bike even before it stopped rolling. My eyes scanned the dead appliances section as I ran up the sidewalk. Also so many dishwashers and washing machines. But there was a monster-sized TV radio record player set. Not that it had been a big screen. I mean, it was thick. You have to set it at least 3 feet away from the wall. I ran over for a closer look. Made by Admiral in the 1950s, it was pretty sure the set featured decades of dust that had sunk into the scratches of the wood cabinet and tatters of cloth hanging from the speaker. Hopefully, the inside were in better shape. The TV and the recorder player weren't much else, but the radio might have the exact parts I need. I took out my phone to text Grandpa. It was the kind of thing he'd pick up for me before someone else grabbed it. I typed a few words before I caught myself. Sometimes I'd think of something to tell before remembering he wasn't there to answer me. Then I felt bad for forgetting. Shouldn't I always feel it, missing him? After erasing the message, I changed it to "Wish you were still here." Even though he couldn't receive it, I clicked send before slipping the phone back into my pocket. He seemed closer then, like just sending the short message would somehow let him know I was thinking of him. I haven't forgotten you. Sometimes I just don't remember you're not here. My brother Tristan could drive me back later to get the set, but it might be gone by then. If I asked Mom or Dad to pick it up, they'd wonder why I was at Moe's instead of at home. I'd ask Moe to hold it for me. He knew me well enough by now, so I'd just take a minute to tell him. I was interested in the set, but when I ran to the trailer that served as the office, Moe wasn't behind the desk smoking a cigar like he always was. Some guy a little older than Tristan sat there watching a TV show where people threw chairs at one another. The patch on his blue work shirt said Jimmy Joe. Jimmy Joe stood up and said something when he noticed me in the doorway. I never liked to people I didn't know. This was an emergency, so I would butt by write notes back and forth. I hated the way people looked at me when they didn't understand my deaf accent. Since I didn't know if I talked very well, I'd rather not do it. Plus, I never liked the way my voice felt. As much as I loved feeling sound from a radio speaker, vibrations in my throat annoyed me, as if they didn't belong there. Kind of like how I love electronics, but not on my own ears. At the desk, I scribbled on a notepad, "Can you save the Admiral set out there for me? I'll come back for it later." He looked back after reading the note, faced the question. I pointed to my ears and then shook my head to let him know that these ears were busted as everything else around here. His eyes widened like they did with most people. A second of panic, like they're not sure what to do with me, or like I might explode in front of them. "Can you read lips or talk?" he asked, pointing back and forth from his mouth to mine. Maybe I thought, but how about just reading that note in your hand? I tapped the paper he was holding. He recovered, then pointed out the window. It don't work. His mouth was really wide when he formed the words. He was probably yelling. He shook his head and waved his hand to emphasize the point. He held back an eye roll. Of course it didn't work. Even if it worked, it wouldn't really work. Those old antenna TVs hadn't been able to get a signal for years. After taking back the note, I wrote for parts. When he read, his eyebrows rose from scared to impressed. I'll ask my dad. Jimmy Joe wrote back, doctor appointment. He'll be back soon. So Mo was his dad. From what I had witnessed during my time as a junkyard customer, Mo started each day with a can of Budweiser and a whole hog breakfast sandwich from the Cradle Pot and additional to a cigar. So doctor visit would probably a good idea. Too bad he didn't pick a more convenient day to start caring about his health. I added, tell him it's for Iris. Thanks. While Jimmy Joe wrote that, I turned another page from the pad, wrote my name on it, and ripped a piece of tape from the dispenser on the desk. Without waiting for a response, I ran outside and slapped the Iris Bailey note on. Tristan wasn't home yet. Oh, chapter 7. Tristan wasn't home yet when I got back there, but more importantly, neither was Mom. I'd have a chance to work on my radios before she came to lecture me. I ran upstairs to my room where my radio collection filled shelves across 3 walls. I'd have to add a new shelf soon. Tools and electronic parts and wires covered the workbench. I'd made out an old door. My mom said it looked like a robot factory exploded in my room, but I knew where to find everything. Most people were surprised when they found out I fixed old radios, but that was because most people didn't notice that sound moves. If it's strong enough, it can move anything. Its waves can break glass or shake the ground or even deafen a whale. Even if they're not strong, sound waves tremble radios too. That was why I didn't need to hear one to know if it was working. With my hand on the speaker, the vibrations let me know if the radio was playing music or crackling with static or sitting there like a box of rocks. For me, listening to the radio was never the point. Each of one of those sitting on my shelves was a reminder of something I'd done right. They weren't working until I got my hands into them. Whenever I fixed something, it felt like I'd won a contest. I sat down next to my bed and touched the side of the Philico 38-690 cabinet radio like I did every day when I got home and every morning before I left. Of all the antique radios in my collection, this was my favorite. Since it was always almost 4 feet tall, it sat on the floor instead of on the shelf like the others. It was from the 1930s and, in my professional opinion, the best radio ever made. Only 3,000 ever existed. For a long time I'd only seen the 38-690 in pictures. Then one day there it was behind the counter at Gunnar's antique shop. My eyes almost fell out of my head. Mr. Gunnar said he was going to throw it away. Sure, it was in rough shape, really rough, but I couldn't let him get rid of it. I asked if I could take it as payment for a repair I'd brought him. He said that wouldn't be fair, so he paid me and gave me the radio. Then I sort of felt like I was stealing from no man. Even though he might change his mind, I told Gunnar that Philip. Oh wait. Um. Even though he might change his mind, I told Mr. Gunnar that the Filippo could be worth it if I restored it. Maybe he didn't know what he had. A cloud of dust flew up when he patted the radio's scratched wooden cabinet. If you do all the work, this thing is going to need you to deserve to keep it. For the next 5 months, I worked to bring the Filicos back from the dead. When I finally finished, the static hummed against my palms with the smallest turn of the dial. The smooth rhythm of music flowed from the speaker, vibrating the whole cabinet of the radio. If anyone had asked why I was sitting there crying with my arms around the radio, I wouldn't have known how to explain it. I couldn't stop thinking about how many years it had sat quietly collecting dust and how close it had come to being thrown away in the garbage because no one thought that it was worth listening to. Usually I left it on overnight, even though that would wear it out faster. While I was in bed, I could reach over and feel the vibrations against my hand and fall asleep, wondering who was singing and who was listening. The floor shook a little, announcing Mom coming up the stairs. I sat there, waiting to find out what my punishment would be. Probably I wouldn't be allowed to use my phone or visit my friend Wendell for a while. The door opened. I turned to her and sighed. I know, serious trouble, but she pointed around my room before I could explain. That's what had happened at school. Wasn't my fault. All of this, she sighed, is out here. What? Get some sheets and towels and wrap them up if you want. But as soon as Tristan gets home, you're going to help us carry everything out to the garage. I gripped the edge of the Philoso as if I could leave my side. No, that isn't fair. You said you'd stay out of trouble. We warned you about this. I didn't know you meant I'd lose my radios. I waved my arms in my collection. I didn't know you'd take everything I have. You're being dramatic. This isn't everything you have. Anyway, she added before I could interrupt her, we have to do something to get your attention. Maybe you'll take us seriously when we say you have to get along with people and follow the rules. That girl's parents are really upset with the school. It's not the school's fault or my fault. They should be mad at themselves for raising an annoying daughter. It can't always be someone's fault. If people annoy you, you have to figure out a better way to deal with it. Easy for you to say. There isn't a better way when everyone ignores you. Warm tears damped my fingertips when my signing hands touched my face. I wiped hands off my jeans. Just then I remembered the Admiral set. I couldn't believe I'd forgotten about it. Mom's announcement about taking my radios must have short-circuited my brain. I have to pick up a TV from the junkyard. Hopefully she wouldn't ask when I'd been at Moe's, but I had to risk it. No, we're not going out to get a new thing to add to the exact collection you're grounded from. You have enough junk anyway. It didn't matter that I had a lot of junk. I didn't have the particular item. I tried to explain it. But Mom turned to leave. The conversation was over. Before she walked out, I waved my hand to get her attention. When can I have my stuff back? A little at a time, starting Monday. What will I do all weekend? You can visit Wendell, and we'll go to Grandma's on Saturday. You're not grounded from everything, just your electronics, which was everything. When Tristan got home, he told me I didn't have to help carry my things out. He knew how much it would hurt. Mom and I will take care of it. I shook my head as I slid one of the smaller radios into a pillowcase. That's okay, but thanks. I really didn't want to do it. But I also didn't want to miss out on one more chance to hold my radios before they were put away. After we hauled my stuff to the garage, I went back up to my room, which wasn't really my room anymore. The shelves were bare. So was the work table, which just a few hours earlier had been piled up with electronic parts. A thin layer of dust outlined all that was missing, an imprint in the carpet next to my bed marked where the Filasso should have been. I laid down in bed and turned toward the wall, so I wouldn't have to face the emptiness Tristan came in later to check on me. I turned when he sat at the edge of the bed and touched my shoulder. You okay? He signed. I rolled onto my back. No, I will never be okay. I'm sorry. It isn't fair. I need my stuff. It's work anyway, like from Mr. Gunnar. So they're grounding me from work, which is stupid. Yeah, I told Mom that. I think they want you to hang out with people instead of radio so much. I do hang out with people, Tristan. Tristan didn't respond that. Maybe he didn't believe me. He was always doing things with friends. It's just like for a couple of days, but there's this radio I really need. Mom won't let me pick it up, even if I promise not to work on it yet. Where is it? Mose, I sat up. Will you get it for me, please? It looks heavy since it is in a cabinet with a TV and a record player, but you're strong enough to load it into your truck. He said what looked like and ran a hand through his hair. Unlike me, he could do it without getting his hand stuck. He had Dad's smooth light brown hair instead of thick dark curls like Mom and me. All I got from Dad was pale skin that turned pink and more freckled in the sun instead of Mom's which tanned. Please, I signed again. Do you know how many vacuum tubes are in there? No idea. How many? I don't know. More than I need. I was going to look it up. Plus tubes, sockets, wires, transformers, caps. Tristan laughed, threw his hands up and surrendered. Which as it happens looks like the sign for give up. Okay, okay. But then what? You don't think Mom and Dad will notice? Hide it in the garage with everything else. Then we'll bring it up to my closet when they're not here. Okay, hold on. Be right back, he signed. Hold like he was clutching something in his fist, and not by pointing to an index finger up like people do all the time, as if they were saying, wait a minute, and then never getting back to you. Tristan knew I hated after a few minutes. Tristan came back and waved to me in the doorway. Let's go. Me? Go where? I just chugged the last of milk and told Mom I had to go out and pick up some more. I jumped up and slid into my shoes. Milk wasn't the only thing we'd be picking up. Mo was back at his usual place, behind the desk in the junkyard's office trailer. "How was the doctor's appointment?" I asked. Tristan voiced my question, and Mo answered, "I'm healthy as a horse. Not any horse I'd want to ride, but I wasn't going to mention that." "How much for the Admiral's set?" Even though Tristan was there, Mo communicated with me like he always did, and held up 2 fingers on one hand and 5 in the other. I pretended to consider the $25 offer, as if I wasn't desperate enough to pay whatever he asked. Before we left home, I'd grabbed 2 20s from the repair money envelope. I held up 2 fingers on one hand and formed it into an O shape. Mo nodded and gave me a thumbs up, then followed us outside. I handed him a 20. He helped Tristan lift up the set and loaded it into the truck. Before hopping into the passenger seat, I shook Mo's hand and hugged Tristan. I have to force myself to stop smiling when we got home so Mom wouldn't wonder why I was so happy. We were pulling into the driveway when I tapped Tristan on the shoulder and signed "Milk," the reason for the trip. As far as Mom knew, he backed out and hurried to the gas station. "Want anything?" he asked when we were outside. "I almost out of gum and rooms," I answered. He squeezed my shoulder and signed, "Pick out whatever you want." The hard part was where we got home. Tristan always parked in the driveway, since our two-car garage had room for only one car and a bunch of stuff. We slid the TV onto a flattened cardboard box and shoved it into the garage, stopping a couple of times along the way to give my arms a rest. Finally, we got it safely in the corner and shoved it with the garage junk. Tomorrow it would be in my closet where it belonged, and my room wouldn't feel so empty anymore. Wait, let me just check something. The week Chapter 8. The weekend of my grounding dragged by even worse than I'd expected. My friend Wendell was out of town with his family, so I couldn't hang out at his house. Tristan and his friend Adam had moved the TV radio record player to my closet. Now and then I'd open the door to take a peek, but I couldn't crack it open yet. After clearing out my room, I didn't have a screwdriver left. Still, I felt better just knowing the Admiral's set was close by, waiting for me. While lying on my bed with my phone, I searched online for the whale. Ever since Miss Amelia had showed us that video in class, I've been thinking about Blue 55 and the people who tried to tag him with the tracker. I couldn't remember the name of the sanctuary from the video, but it came up after I quick searched about Blue 55's tagging. The Meet Our Residents page on the sanctuary's website showed a picture of the animal that lived there, along with a description. Either the sanctuary staff had found them injured or sick, or someone had called for help, and when they found them hurt in the water on the beach, the animals lived either in the large sea pens or indoor pools until they were healthy enough to return to the wild. Most of the animals were birds and seals and sea lions. One dolphin they had to move indoors if they couldn't release him before winter hit Alaska. For some, the sanctuary would always be their home. The eagle who was blind in one eye couldn't hunt for food in the wild. He probably didn't understand why he couldn't fly outdoors anymore. The otter orphans had an indoor-outdoor pool to swim in. They'd have to live in that sanctuary forever too. They had lost their mothers when they were so young that they hadn't learned how to be otter. I wondered about the animals who'd been taken in when they were older and so remembered their homes. The sanctuary staff would release them close when they'd been found in hopes they'd find their families. They couldn't promise it would happen, though. The released animals might have to make it on their own. At the top of the pail labeled "The Staff" was a picture of a few people in the light blue skirts, with their arms around another, smiling in front of the sanctuary. The caption photo said that it was the expedition team that tried to tag Blue 55 the year before. After scrolling through some of the posts, I found one about the failed attempt to tag Blue 55. The tracker they wanted to put on him will collect information, not just about where he swam, but other things too, like his heart rate. It would also record his song. They'd share information about him on their website if they ever did tag him. Now I really wish they'd tagged him. If they shared what they recorded from that, I'd get to feel his song and heartbeat through a computer speaker. A picture showed Blue 55 back arching out of the water next to a small boat. Mounted on the front of the boat was a metal platform with railings on either side. A woman wearing a stocking cap and a green fleece jacket stood at the edge of the platform, holding a long metal pole outstretched toward the whale. It looked like she'd topple over the railing and into the ocean. If she leaned over any further to reach him, the caption read, "Near miss, Blue 55 takes a dive before sanctuary staffer Andy River can attack a tracking device." The tracker at the end of the pole looked close enough to brush the whale's back. A grimace lined Andy's face, either from an effort of disappointment. The next photo showed water cascading down Blue 55. Huge tail as he started his deep dive. Andy had been so close to him before he slipped away. Maybe she was only interested in him as a scientist, but she tried so hard to reach him. Maybe she really cared about him too. If Blue 55 followed the route he usually did, he'd be near the sanctuary soon. A new post said that the team would try again to tag him. That didn't say that they would do differently next time so they could get close enough to attack the tracker before it swam away. Maybe there was a way to get him to stick around a little longer. At the bottom of the page was a link to more information about Blue 55's communication. The article Piano Keys describe what whale song frequencies. If you sit down at the piano and hit the lowest key. Okay, guys, I'm just taking this couple of seconds to tell you if you want to end this video, you have to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. So, let's get back into the video. Sit down at a piano and hit the lowest key. The very first one on the left that plays the frequency of 27.5 hertz. That's the frequency of most whale and whale songs. They sing lower than that too, like 20 hertz or 10 hertz. But pianos didn't have a key that played that low. Count over to key 13 and you'll play 55 hertz. Blue 55's frequency, and the reason he couldn't talk to any other whale. Although I was thinking of a way to reach out to him, at my desk I grabbed a scrap of paper to jot down some notes. I didn't know yet how it would work, but maybe this attention with something that sounded a bit like himself. As I wrote, a thought came up that crumbled the edges of my plan. Maybe he was like the same whale on the beach, except that he'd found a way to survive. On the sanctuary's post about Blue 55 communication, I scanned the comments section to see if anyone wondered the same thing I had. No one suggested it yet. So I scrolled back up and left a comment. Maybe the whale's deaf? Okay. We read all the way from chapter 4 to we read chapter 4 all the way through chapter 8, and we left off at chapter 9. We will be reading that in the next video, which will probably come out tomorrow on Monday. And yes, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you like this digital book, Song for Whale, and you want more Sunshine State books. I'm really, really, really hoping that this video can inspire people to read more books from the Sunshine State, because they handpick those lists and do a lot of work. So again, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Bye.